The invitation arrived on a quantum-encrypted channel, its elegant script translated into 247 languages simultaneously. Ambassador Chen Wei held the crystalline data slate in her weathered hands, reading the words that would change everything. The Galactic Concordance, that ancient assembly of civilized worlds, was convening an emergency summit to address what they called the escalating crisis of unregulated expansion into hazardous territories. They were inviting Earth to send a representative. It was the first time in humanity's 2 centuries of space exploration that the elder species had acknowledged our existence beyond trade negotiations and quarantine protocols. Chen Wei knew this was no honor. This was a trial. The transport ship that arrived to collect her was a marvel of engineering, grown rather than built, its organic hull pulsing with bioluminescent patterns that her translator couldn't quite decipher. The Alvorian pilot, a being of cascading crystalline structures and harmonic vibrations, regarded her with what she assumed was curiosity tinged with something else. Pity, perhaps. Or disgust. In the 72 hours it took to reach the Concordance station orbiting the binary stars of Kepler-16, she reviewed everything humanity had learned about galactic civilization. The elder species, those ancient races who had achieved faster-than-light travel when Earth's continents were still forming, had built their empire on a foundation of caution. They settled garden worlds, planets where gravity held steady at 0.8 standard, where the atmosphere was gentle, where the local lifeforms had evolved in peace. They thrived in these paradise planets, their populations growing to numbers that made Earth's billions seem quaint. And they looked upon humanity's choices with absolute horror. The Concordance station was beautiful in a way that hurt to witness. Spires of impossible materials spiraled through the void, connected by bridges of pure light. Gardens floated in vacuum, sustained by technologies humanity couldn't begin to comprehend. Chen Wei was escorted through corridors where the very walls sang with history, past chambers where representatives of species that had touched the stars for 100 million years debated the philosophies that governed reality itself. She felt young. She felt small. She felt the weight of every human life pressing against her shoulders as she entered the Grand Assembly. 3,000 species had sent representatives. The chamber was a sphere, delegates positioned at every angle in defiance of conventional gravity, each suspended in their own environmental bubble suited to their biology. Chen Wei stood alone on her platform, gravity holding her boots to a surface while beings that existed as swarms of particles and creatures of pure thought regarded her from every direction. The Archon speaker, an ancient being from a race that had witnessed galaxies collide and reform, addressed her in a voice that bypassed sound entirely, speaking directly into her consciousness. Chen Wei of Earth, the presence intoned, you stand before the Concordance accused of crimes against reason itself. Your species has committed the ultimate transgression. You have chosen to settle Deathworlds. The word hung in the chamber like a condemnation. Deathworlds. That's what they called planets like Earth, like the colonies humanity had carved out of worlds that fought back with every breath. The Archon continued, its consciousness pressing against hers with the weight of eons. You have taken root on planets where gravity crushes, where weather kills, where the very biosphere evolves to consume and destroy. You have spread your kind to worlds of ice and fire, to planets racked by radiation, to moons where the slightest error means instant death. Worse, you have begun terraforming projects on worlds that should remain forever untouched. You have brought children into these hells. You celebrate this madness. We can remain silent no longer. Chen Wei felt 3,000 species watching her, waiting for her response. She thought of home, of Earth with its hurricanes and earthquakes, its volcanoes and ice ages, its diseases and predators and countless ways to die. She thought of Mars colony, where families lived beneath radiation shields and taught their children to check their seals before every single door. She thought of Europa station, carved into ice older than multicellular life, where miners extracted resources from an ocean that could freeze them solid in seconds. She thought of New Terra, that beautiful hell of a planet where gravity was 1.3 standard and the local wildlife had evolved claws that could shred combat armor. And she smiled. The smile seemed to disturb them more than fear would have. Chen Wei could feel the shift in the chamber's atmosphere, a collective recoiling that transcended species boundaries. The Archon speaker's presence intensified, probing at her thoughts as if searching for the source of such inappropriate levity. She let them look. Let them see what they were dealing with. Honored delegates of the Concordance, she began, her voice steady despite the fact that she was addressing beings who could unmake her with a thought, I accept your invitation to speak. But before I address these accusations, I must ask a question. How many of you have ever truly faced death? The silence that followed was profound. In the vacuum of that pause, Chen Wei accessed her neural interface, pulling up data streams that her ship had compiled during the journey. I've spent the last 3 days studying your worlds. All of them. Every single paradise planet claimed by the elder species. And I've noticed something remarkable. Your mortality rates are essentially zero. Disease has been conquered. Aging has been reversed. Accidents are prevented by AI systems that predict danger before it manifests. On most Concordance worlds, a citizen can expect to live for thousands of years without ever experiencing genuine physical peril. You've built heavens, and I mean that with absolute sincerity. What you've accomplished is miraculous. She paused, letting that acknowledgement settle before continuing. But you asked why we choose differently. You want to understand why humanity, given the option to settle safer worlds, instead gravitates toward planets that you classify as hazardous. You see it as madness, as a kind of species-wide death wish. I'm here to tell you that you're looking at it backwards. We don't choose death worlds despite the danger. We choose them because of what danger makes us. A ripple of confusion passed through the assembly. The Thurian representative, a being of flowing liquid metal, formed itself into a questioning posture. Chen Wei seized the moment. Let me tell you about Sarah Okonkwo. She was 9 years old when the reactor on Ganymede Station began to fail. The adult supervisors were in the outer ring when the cascade started. Sarah was in the educational wing with 23 other children. The emergency systems gave them 4 minutes before radiation levels would become lethal. Do you know what Sarah did? She pulled up the incident report, projecting the security footage into the center of the chamber. She didn't panic. She didn't freeze. She organized the other children into teams, assigned the older ones to carry the younger, mapped the fastest route to the emergency shelter, and got every single child to safety with 40 seconds to spare. Then she went back for the classroom pet, a rabbit named Einstein. She made it with 3 seconds left. The footage showed a small girl in a pressure suit 3 sizes too large, carrying a habitat cage, diving through a closing blast door as alarms screamed around her. Sarah is 16 now. She's training to be a reactor engineer. When we asked her why she went back for the rabbit, she said it was because Einstein was afraid and she'd made a promise to take care of him. She understood that promises matter more when keeping them is hard. Chen Wei let that sink in before continuing. That's what you don't understand about death worlds. They teach lessons that paradise cannot. They forge something in the soul that safety erodes. A member of the Veloquin collective, their consciousness distributed across 1,000 small crystalline bodies, chimed in with a voice like wind through caves. You glorify suffering. You romanticize danger. This is the thinking of primitives, of species that have not yet evolved beyond their violent origins. The accusation stung because there was truth in it, but Chen Wei had prepared for this. No. We don't glorify suffering. We acknowledge it. We face it. We use it to temper ourselves into something stronger. Every human who has ever lived on Earth has inherited a legacy written in the bones of survivors. Our ancestors faced ice ages with nothing but fire and fur. They crossed oceans in wooden boats, not knowing if they'd ever see land again. They built civilizations in deserts and jungles and frozen tundras where every single day was a battle against an environment that wanted them dead. And they didn't just survive. They thrived. They created art and philosophy and science precisely because life was precious and fleeting. She pulled up more data, flooding the chamber with images. Humans on Mars, teaching children to solve for trajectory equations because a calculation error meant death. Miners on Titan, working in methane seas at temperatures that would shatter steel, supporting families back on Earth. Scientists on Venus's floating colonies, studying atmospheric phenomena in an environment that could dissolve them in seconds. Terraformers on New Terra, transforming a hostile world generation by generation, planting trees they'd never see fully grown. You call these death worlds. We call them home. And the difference matters. The Archon speaker's presence grew heavier, pressing against the edges of Chen Wei's consciousness like a storm gathering on a horizon. You speak of resilience, of strength forged through adversity. But at what cost, human? We have the records. We know what your Deathworld evolution has created. Your species experiences fear at levels that would traumatize most concordant citizens. Your stress hormones can literally damage your own bodies. You age rapidly, your cells deteriorating under the constant assault of your hostile environment. Your own planet has driven 99% of all species that ever lived on it to extinction. You celebrate survival, but you seem blind to the mountains of death upon which your civilization is built. The accusation echoed through the chamber, and Chen Wei felt the weight of it. Because it was true. All of it was true. Earth had been merciless to the species that evolved upon it, including humanity. Natural selection on a death world was written in blood and bone and the fossil record of everything that failed to adapt quickly enough. But she'd come prepared to face this truth head-on. You're absolutely right, she said, and the admission clearly surprised them. Earth has killed more species than currently exist in all of concordant space. Our own evolutionary history is a horror story. Early humans nearly went extinct at least 3 times that we know of. Our population bottlenecked to perhaps 10,000 individuals. We should have died. By any reasonable measure, we should have vanished like the Neanderthals, like the Denisovans, like countless other hominid species that are now just bones in the ground. She paused, pulling up genetic data that floated in the center of the assembly like a double helix of light and shadow. But we didn't die. And that near extinction? It left marks. We carry the scars in our DNA. Every human alive today is descended from those 10,000 survivors who refused to give up when the world turned against them. We inherited their stubbornness. Their creativity. Their absolute refusal to accept fate. That's what death worlds do. They create survivors who look at impossible odds and find a way through anyway. A new voice entered the discussion, belonging to the Remnari delegate, a species of energy beings who existed partially outside conventional spacetime. Their words formed as patterns of light and mathematics. But surely you see the madness in perpetuating this cycle? You have the technology now to modify yourselves, to adapt to paradise worlds, to leave behind the trauma of your origins. Why condemn future generations to the same suffering your ancestors endured? It was the crucial question, the one Chen Wei had known would come. She took a breath, gathering her thoughts, reaching for words that could bridge the gap between species who had forgotten struggle and humanity who couldn't imagine existence without it. Because paradise is a trap, she said quietly, and felt the chamber react with shock. Please understand, I mean no disrespect to what you've built. Your worlds are magnificent. Your societies have achieved a level of peace and prosperity that humans can barely imagine. But you've also lost something crucial. You've lost the edge that adversity provides. You've lost the innovation that comes from necessity. You've lost the bone-deep understanding that nothing is guaranteed, that survival is always active, never passive. She pulled up comparative data, charts and graphs that told a story the concordants wouldn't want to hear. In the last 200 years, humanity has developed more new technologies than the concordance has produced in the last 10,000. We've made breakthrough after breakthrough in fields you consider closed. Why? Because we have to. Because our deathworlds don't forgive complacency. Because every single day, our environment forces us to be better, smarter, more adaptive. The Thurian representative flowed into an aggressive posture. You speak of innovation as if it justifies the suffering. But your medical data tells a different story. Humans experience psychological trauma at rates we can barely comprehend. Your soldiers return from combat with minds broken by what they've witnessed. Your children develop anxiety disorders from the mere anticipation of danger. Your entire species exists in a state of chronic stress that would be classified as a medical emergency on any concordance world. Is this the price of your precious innovation? Generations living in fear? Chen Wei felt the accusation like a physical blow because it struck at something she'd struggled with personally. She thought of her own daughter, living on Mars colony, who had nightmares about hull breaches and radiation exposure. She thought of the therapy sessions, the anxiety medications, the very real psychological cost of raising children in environments that required constant vigilance. But she also thought of that same daughter, now 23, who had personally designed an improved air recycling system that had saved 17 lives during an equipment failure. Who looked at problems and saw solutions. Who faced the universe with courage earned through genuine challenge. The weight of 3,000 species judgment pressed down upon Chen Wei as she formulated her response. She could feel the concordance waiting, ready to dismiss humanity's choices as the delusions of a young species too traumatized by its own evolution to recognize salvation when offered. But she hadn't come here to beg for understanding. She'd come to make them see what they'd lost in their gardens of eternal safety. Yes, she said, her voice cutting through the murmur of disbelief that followed the Thurian's accusation, we experience fear. We know trauma. Our minds can break under stress that you've engineered out of existence. And I would not trade that vulnerability for anything you could offer. The chamber erupted in a cascade of reactions, species-specific expressions of shock and confusion rippling across 3,000 different biologies. The Archon speaker's presence surged forward, overwhelming in its ancient authority. You would condemn your own children to psychological damage. This is the statement of a damaged mind, human. This is exactly why the concordance must intervene. You cannot be trusted to make rational decisions about your own welfare. Chen Wei stood firm against that cosmic pressure, drawing strength from every human who had ever faced impossible odds and chosen to stand anyway. You think we're damaged. I think you've forgotten what it means to be alive. Real life, not the simulation of existence you've created in your paradise gardens. Life that matters because it can end. Life that means something because it's fragile. She accessed her neural interface again, pulling up a file she prepared specifically for this moment. Let me tell you about the Concordance's own history. I've studied your records, the ones you make publicly available. Do you know when the last truly revolutionary scientific discovery was made by an elder species? Not an incremental improvement or a refinement of existing technology, but a genuine paradigm shift in understanding. The silence that followed was answer enough. It was 43,000 years ago. The Veliquin Collective's breakthrough in consciousness transfer. Since then, nothing. 43 millennia of stagnation dressed up as stability. You've been coasting on the innovations of your ancestors, the ones who still remembered struggle, who still knew what it meant to strive against limitation. A representative from the Siorvani Empire, a species of hive-minded insectoids who communicated through pheromones and electromagnetic pulses, responded with what her translator rendered as defensive outrage. We have achieved perfection in our systems. Further innovation is unnecessary when all needs are met, all desires fulfilled. You speak of stagnation, but we call it enlightenment. We have transcended the crude necessity of struggle. Chen Wei smiled again, that same expression that had disturbed them before. Have you though? Because from where I'm standing, you look terrified. You've called this summit not because humanity is suffering, but because we're thriving in environments you've declared uninhabitable. You're not concerned for our welfare. You're disturbed by what our success implies about your own choices. The accusation hung in the chamber like a live grenade, and Chen Wei could feel the collective recoil of species who had built their entire civilization on the premise that safety and prosperity were the highest possible achievements. She pressed forward, knowing she had to make them understand before they dismissed her entirely. We discovered something you've forgotten. Happiness isn't the same as meaning. Comfort isn't the same as fulfillment. You've created worlds where no one suffers, but also where no one truly overcomes. Where no one faces genuine challenges that test the limits of what they believe themselves capable of. And in doing so, you've created a civilization of beings who've lost the capacity to grow. She pulled up one final piece of data, a comparative study that had taken Earth's best xenopsychologists decades to compile. We've been studying your populations, with permission from your own public health databases. Do you know what we found? Depression rates among concordant citizens are 300% higher than among humans living on classified death worlds. Suicide rates, even with your extended lifespans and advanced mental health care, are climbing in every paradise world we examined. Your therapists are treating an epidemic of what they call existence fatigue. Beings who have everything they could possibly want, who live in perfect safety and comfort, who are slowly losing the will to continue existing because nothing they do matters. Nothing they achieve required them to become more than they were. The chamber fell into a silence so profound that Chen Wei could hear her own heartbeat thundering in her ears. The Archon speaker's presence withdrew slightly, as if the ancient being needed space to process what had been said. When it spoke again, the overwhelming authority had been replaced by something that sounded almost like uncertainty. You suggest that suffering serves a purpose. That struggle is not a problem to be solved but a feature to be maintained. Chen Wei shook her head. I'm saying that challenge serves a purpose. That having something meaningful to strive toward, something that requires us to grow and adapt and become better versions of ourselves, is fundamental to psychological health. Not just for humans. For any sentient being. She could see she had their attention now, truly, perhaps for the first time since entering the chamber. The dismissive contempt had been replaced by something more complex, uncomfortable. Good. Discomfort meant thinking, and thinking was what she needed from them. Let me tell you about Marcus Chen, my great-grandfather, the first human born on Mars. The concordance would classify his childhood as abusive by your standards. He grew up in a habitat where a single seal failure could kill everyone inside. He had to learn calculus by age 8 because understanding orbital mechanics wasn't optional, it was survival. He experienced his first genuine terror at age 6 when a solar flare warning sent the entire colony into emergency shelters for 36 hours. By your measures, his childhood was a trauma factory. Chen Wei pulled up images of an old man, weathered and scarred, smiling at the camera with eyes that held depths the concordant species had forgotten could exist. Marcus lived to be 147 years old, refusing all life extension treatments beyond basic medical care. He said he wanted to feel his time maturing. He designed the hydroponics system that allowed Mars to become self-sufficient. He trained 4 generations of engineers. He wrote poetry about red sunsets seen through habitation domes. And when he died, surrounded by the children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren he'd raised on that Deathworld, his last words were, "What a spectacular adventure." His funeral was attended by 3,000 people whose lives he'd touched. They didn't mourn a man broken by trauma. They celebrated a life that had meant something because it was spent in service of making the impossible real. The Veloquin collective chimed in again, their 1,000 voices harmonizing into a single question. But what of those who don't thrive? What of the humans who break under the pressure of your death worlds? You speak of survivors, but what of the casualties? It was the right question, the hard question, and Chen Wei was grateful for it. We lose people. Children die in accidents that wouldn't happen on safer worlds. Adults develop conditions that your medicine prevented millennia ago. We bury our dead in soil that fought us for every inch, and yes, it hurts. It hurts in ways I cannot adequately describe. Every life lost is a tragedy. Every person who suffers is someone we fail to protect. She paused, letting the weight of that admission settle. But here's what you need to understand. We don't see those losses as evidence that we should retreat to safety. We see them as evidence that we need to become better. Smarter. More prepared. Every death teaches us. Every failure drives innovation. The radiation shielding technology we developed after the Ganymede incident. We've shared it freely. It's now protecting 37 different human settlements and has been adopted by 6 species who trade with us. Sarah Okonkwo's quick thinking didn't just save 24 children. It led to a complete redesign of emergency protocols that has since prevented 14 similar incidents. The suffering produces meaning because we transform it into progress. The Archon speaker's presence returned, and this time Chen Wei felt something different in its consciousness. Not hostility, but a kind of desperate confusion, as if an ancient certainty had been shaken. You speak as if pain is currency to be spent for advancement. This is the philosophy of a species still trapped in its violent past. We evolved beyond this. We recognize that suffering is not noble, not transformative, simply unnecessary. We built paradise because we could. Because it was the right thing to do. Chen Wei nodded slowly. And I'm not arguing that you were wrong. For you, for species who evolved on gentle worlds, who never knew what it meant to fight for every breath, paradise might be the right choice. But you're here today because you want to force that choice on us. You want to forbid humanity from settling Deathworlds, from raising our children in environments you consider hazardous, from choosing struggle over safety. She straightened her shoulders, feeling the weight of her entire species behind her words. I'm here to tell you that we refuse. We will not abandon the worlds we've claimed. We will not retreat to your gardens and forget the lessons written in our bones. We will continue to settle planets that test us, that demand we become more than we are, that require us to earn our survival every single day. And if the Concordance cannot accept this, if you truly believe you have the authority to dictate where humanity can and cannot make our homes, then I need you to understand something very clearly. The chamber held its breath, 3,000 species waiting for what came next. You call them Deathworlds. You see them as hells to be avoided, as mistakes of cosmic creation that should remain uninhabited. But we were born in hell. We were forged in hell. We learned to thrive in hell while your ancestors were still swimming in warm seas and basking under gentle suns. You have the technology. You have the power. You have the numbers. But if you try to force us off our worlds, you'll discover what evolution on a death world actually creates. The threat hung in the chamber, not shouted but stated as simple fact. Chen Wei saw the ripple of reaction, the calculations running behind alien eyes. They had the power to end humanity if they chose. Their weapons were older than human civilization, their fleets vast beyond counting. But they'd also seen the data, studied the reports of human settlements on worlds that should have killed them. They understood, perhaps for the first time, that a species that thrived on planets that actively tried to kill them might not be easy to defeat, even with superior technology. But I didn't come here to threaten war, Chen Wei continued, her voice softening. I came to offer understanding. You invited us to this summit because you're afraid. Afraid that we're making a mistake. Afraid that we're condemning ourselves to unnecessary suffering. Maybe even afraid that our existence challenges the fundamental assumptions upon which you've built your entire civilization. I understand that fear. And I want you to understand ours. She pulled up one final image, Earth seen from space, that fragile blue marble swirled with white clouds, beautiful and deadly in equal measure. We're afraid of becoming like you. Of losing what makes us human. Of settling into comfortable stagnation and forgetting that we're capable of more. Of raising children who never learn that they can overcome, who never discover their own strength because they never face genuine challenge. We're afraid that paradise is a cage, and that if we step inside, we'll never have the courage to leave. The silence that followed felt different now, contemplative rather than hostile. The Archon speaker's presence enfolded her, gentle where before it had been overwhelming. What would you have us do, human? Accept that we cannot coexist. Watch as your species spreads across deathworlds we have marked as forbidden, wondering when you will turn your survival instincts toward conquest. Chen Wei smiled, and this time it was warm, genuine. I would have you learn from us, as we learn from you. You've mastered the art of peace, of stability, of creating societies that endure for millions of years. We could use those lessons. We're still struggling with war, with inequality, with all the violence that evolution on a death world wrote into our nature. But we can teach you what you've forgotten. How to strive. How to grow. How to find meaning in challenge rather than comfort. We don't have to be enemies. We can be the balance each other needs. Your wisdom tempering our recklessness. Our innovation energizing your stagnation. She extended her hand, a human gesture that her neural interface broadcast as intention to the species that lacked physical form. The Concordance fears deathworlds. Humanity embraces them. Both choices are valid. Both serve purposes. Let us prove that different paths can coexist. Let us show you that survival and prosperity aren't opposites but partners in the dance of civilization. And maybe, just maybe, some of your youth who are slowly dying of existence fatigue might find renewal in facing genuine challenges. Not everyone needs paradise. Some of us need purpose. Can the Concordance be wise enough to accept both? The chamber erupted in discussion, 3,000 species debating across communication channels that span the electromagnetic spectrum and beyond. Chen Wei stood in the center of it all, one human woman representing a species of death-world survivors, and waited to see if wisdom or fear would prevail. The Archon speaker's presence returned one final time, ancient and vast, carrying the weight of civilizations that had endured while stars were born and died. You have given us much to consider, Chen Wei of Earth. The Concordance will deliberate. But know this, whether we forbid your expansion or embrace it, you have already changed us. You have reminded us of something we thought lost to time. The understanding that existence without challenge is existence without growth. That comfort without purpose is a slow death of its own kind. Go home to your death worlds, human. Raise your children in the crucibles that forged you. And know that we will be watching, learning, perhaps even envying, what you become. Chen Wei bowed, respect offered freely to those who had earned it through eons of existence, and turned to leave. As she made her way back through the corridors of impossible beauty, past the gardens floating in vacuum and the spires that sang with captured starlight, she thought of home. Of Mars with its red dust and thin atmosphere. Of Europa with its endless ice and hidden oceans. Of New Terra with its crushing gravity and deadly wildlife. Of Earth, that original death world, beautiful and terrible and forever home. They would continue to spread, she knew. They would find the hardest worlds, the planets that tested every limit, the environments that demanded humanity become more than it believed possible. Not because they were broken. Not because they didn't know any better. But because in the crucible of challenge, in the furnace of adversity, in the constant struggle against environments that refused to be tamed, humanity had discovered something the Concordance had forgotten in their gardens of eternal peace. They had discovered what it meant to be truly, vibrantly, desperately alive. And they would not surrender that truth for all the paradise worlds in the galaxy.